So now we're going to take a look at the wonderful world of a pure Python solution with Jupyter notebooks. Now, even though this isn't the easiest thing to get up and running, following it carefully, you will be able to do it, believe me. But it's a great environment for learning because it's very interactive and simple to use once it's set up. It combines code as well as text, so we can highlight text around our code explaining what's going on. We could also add visuals if we wanted. The important thing is it supports incremental learning. What we mean by this is that you can try one piece of code and then start manipulating that code to see what happens when you try it in a slightly different way. And of course, we can save these notebooks and easily share and collaborate on the code. So what do we need to do to get this up and running? Well, we'll look at it at first on Linux. So we can make sure that we're in our home directory and we can create a subdirectory called PCEP. This can be our project if you like. We can move into that directory and then we can use Python-m calling up an additional module. Here we're calling up the module venv for a virtual environment. I'm creating a Python virtual environment and I'm naming it virtual. This will be a subdirectory inside of my current working directory, which is going to be PCEP. So it sounds all very complex, but we're just setting up a new directory in which we're going to have some Python code. This is a new and clean environment just for this project. So it starts off pretty empty. If I ever need to add modules, then I'm going to need to add the modules to this virtual environment, in which case I'm always going to know which modules are needed by the project and I'm not going to overload my system modules. So it's a very good way of working. Having created the virtual environment, we need to activate it. So I'm just using dot to represent my current directory and I'm just putting the path through to the activate script. I'm running this inside of PowerShell, so I can use the Linux style of notation where I use / just because I'm used to it, but it works in PowerShell just as well as it works with a / as a path separator. We then need to install the Python module, and we can do that with the Python installer. So pip install, and the module we need to install is Notebook. Once that has installed, then we can fire up the notebook with the command Jupyter Notebook. This is then going to open up our browser, and we're going to have a browser-based solution running in Python that's going to allow me to work with Python code. As we step through the process, we explain in the slide that we're creating the project directory, moving into the directory, creating our Python virtual environment and activating the environment, installing the required module, and then starting our notebook server. Once that server does start, it's going to look something like this. But we're going to move out now through to our Windows system, and we're going to be demonstrating the install of Jupyter Notebooks. We're going to begin by setting up, first of all, on Windows, but for those of you wanting to learn Linux or get into Linux, we're also going to demonstrate the same process in a Linux environment in the next clip. And here we are back in our glorious PowerShell environment. So welcome. We're going to be able to look at setting up our Jupyter Notebook. I'm working in my home directory. You can see users and Vagrant. I'm working as a Vagrant user, but I'm going to use the full path by using a variable to my home directory, MD for making a directory, $home, and then / PCEP. We can use / or / there, whatever you're used to. They work the same in PowerShell. But that's now created my project directory. I'm going to move into that project directory again using the full path with my $home variable. We can of course see from the PowerShell prompt that I am now in the correct Vagrant and PCEP directory. And from here we're going to create a Python virtual environment. So I can use the Python executable with the option -m to specify a module that I want to load, the virtual environment module, and that's going to be used to create the virtual environment, and I have to give it a name. I'm going to call it virtual. So having hit the big enter key, we're now creating the virtual environment. Creating the virtual environment, though, is just creating the subdirectory structure. We have to activate it. To activate the environment, we will make it the active Python environment, and we do this by running the activate script. We're going to find it within our virtual directory. That was the name we assigned to the virtual environment, scripts and activate. And look, we can see now that my prompt has changed. We've got the word virtual, the name of our virtual environment. Anything we do now in relationship to Python is working in the context of this virtual environment. I can clear my screen and we can start seeing how they work for us if I go through and install a Python package. I can do that with the pip command. So pip install, this is the Python installer, and the package that I want is Notebook. And we can see that there's a lot of requirements for this. So there's an awful lot of packages that are being installed. So we've now downloading them, and now we're in the process of installing them. But they're all being installed into the context of our virtual environment. I can also use the pip command to list the packages that have been installed. And we can see that we have a lot of packages now that have been installed. If I use the deactivate command, we then close or shut down the virtual environment. Running pip list outside of the virtual environment are showing the packages that are installed into the system Python. And we can see we only have the pip installer, we don't have anything else. This then gives me two advantages. We don't overbake our system environment with every package that we have to work with, and we know exactly which modules and packages are required by our project. So if I activate the environment again, and then I can go through and run the Jupyter notebook, this then just fires up the Python commands needed to open up my browser and run the Jupyter Notebook server. We can see then it allows me to browse my project, and I can create a new notebook. I can accept the default kernel. I only have one Python kernel to run anyway, so I'm going to choose that. And then we can start writing and executing our code. I'm going to begin, though, by just naming my notebook, and I can move up to where it says untitled, and then I'm just going to call it my first notebook and click rename. Moving back then through to my cell, I can write my code, and let's just put our hello statement again. So we can use the print function, and we should be very good at this now. And inside of our quotes, we have the string that we want to display. And I can use Shift and Enter to execute the code. There is also a run menu and the arrow key. Equally, I could use those, but Shift and Enter becomes easy. On the cell that's been created below, I'm just going to change this from code to markdown language. And this then is going to allow me to put text that I can use. Using a single hash, I'm putting in a title, and I'm just putting in my first notebook. Shift and Enter to render the markdown text, and I can move that cell towards the top. I'm going to insert a cell underneath the heading, again making sure that it's set to markdown, and I'm going to set a subheading, so that's going to be 2 hashes. And then we can put some kind of heading relating to testing the print command. So we can document what we're doing as well. So test our print function. I'm now on the cell for the print function. I'm going to insert a new cell below this. Again, I'm setting it to Markdown. I'm going to put another subheading. So 2 hash symbols. And then we can have our conditional test. And we can put in the if statement that we should be equally familiar with now. So if 2 is equal to 2, colon, and then return, you can see we're getting the correct indentation level. We can then print it works. Shift and enter will run just this cell. And we can see there we get it works as our output. But if I go back and maybe change all of my code to have hello world, and it works with an exclamation mark, I can also go into the run menu and then run all cells. So I can see then the hello world and it works. So we can see both statements are working together in tandem. I can always go and save my work and come back to it later. So we can go File and Save Notebook. We can go File, Close and shut down the notebook. So we can see this now in my file browser and it's in my file system. If we want to shut down the Jupyter server, we can use then File and Shut Down. And then it shuts down the Jupyter server. We could start it up again with our Jupyter Notebook command. But don't forget, if I reboot my system or shut this window down, I will need to activate my virtual environment and start the Jupyter Notebook.